Hey, it's Drake. So, lately I've been thinking about secrets and lies. And to start it off, I think I'll say a quote of Rilke. He said, I want to be with those who know secrets or else alone. And here's a drawing, Rilke. And I was thinking mostly about lies in relation to literature and art in general, but mostly with literature because lies are really good verbally. And this was partially from just kind of everything recently. Uh, the recognitions has a lot to do with forgeries. Um, a lot of people have pseudonyms. Uh, a lot of literature is based around criminals, lying to oneself, delusions like Don Quixote, things like that, literary hoaxes. And I was wondering, like, because literary hoaxes have always been one of the most interesting things to me. And it has something to do with like the childish joy of tricking somebody. Because and people love being tricked. People love being tricked because my I have a little cousin who last time I saw him he was about a year and a half old. That was a couple months ago. And he loves being tricked because he loves being chased also. And so I would chase him around the living room. And since he's so little, I can, as long as his head's behind something, he doesn't know anything that's going on. So I would trick him to think I was going one way. And he would, expect me to go around that way. But then, I snuck around the other way and he would laugh so hard. He would just start giggling and he would almost fall over from laughing so hard. Even at a year and a half. And I would do other things like this. So there must be something where people. It's not that they enjoy being lied to necessarily because lying has a particular connotation, but people love being tricked to some extent. People love being fooled. And I think that also extends to people love fooling oneself. And not sure the best place to start with this. So I have several books here that I think relate to this one way or another. I guess I could start with the first line of the recognitions because um, it's very good. Even Camilla had enjoyed masquerades, of the safe sort where the mask may be dropped at the critical moment. It presumes itself as reality. And I think about that sort of thing a lot. That old saying, "Fake it till you make it." At what point does the trick or the lie become what someone considers reality? Because of course everyone acknowledges fiction as being like a trick because you're using words that could easily describe the real world, and we generally use them in our normal everyday language to describe concrete events and actions and commands and things that happen in the real world. But it's kind of like a little trick where you use these words that are like practical, almost always like practical, at least like for animals, all communication, it seems, for the most part, is practical. But then with people, we can create like tricks and lies and all this stuff that lengthens everything and convolutes everything and makes everything more difficult. And I think that lack of practicality at some point is at the basis of literature. And what kind of got me thinking about this is I was reading this short story by João Guimarães Rosa, and uh, and I love this story. It's in this anthology of Brazilian short stories from the 20th century. No, no, it's not the 20th century. It's just Brazilian short stories. Um, and the story is about this young girl who's in like a poor area of Brazil, I think the Sertão, and she has parents, and her she calls her she calls her dad greedy boy, and her mom big girl, and she talks in neologisms or she combines words. I think in the story she's like 7, 8, 9, something like that, like a young girl. And one day she starts thinking about a rainbow, and she says, it'd be nice to see a rainbow, something like that. And then this really horrible storm, they see the storm clouds rushing over the tops of the trees, and then they have this huge torrential downpour, and then she sees a rainbow. And, because of the rain, everyone's crops grew well and all that stuff. So then, but no one thought anything of it. It's just, whatever, random coincidence. And then the next time she said, it'd be really, like, I want a cake. And then this lady walks like from a long distance away, 3 towns over, just to bring a cake for free. And then the parents start to wonder. And then the next time, the girl wishes for a frog, and almost instantly, a frog starts hopping through the doorway and just sits in front of her. And then the parents catch on that they have a magical daughter, like a saint daughter, who can make wishes and God grants them. And so they start to try to get her to make wishes that are practical, like wishing for money, wishing for a bigger house, things like that. But she never does it. She only wishes for the most irrelevant and inconsequential things. And then people start to talk about her like she's like a witch or a saint. They go back and forth, and then one day she dies, and she had wanted a pink and green coffin, and the father said, no, no, it's too much money, we can't do that, she's already dead. And then the mom's trying to convince the dad, oh no, we need to do what she wants, she's our daughter. And then the mom just has a moment of realization, wait a moment, wait a minute, it's going to happen anyway. It doesn't matter who I convince or who wants it to happen. It's going to happen. And I recommend reading the story because the way he tells it is just so precious. And I think that story gets to the heart of a lot of literature, especially like relating to magical realism, where these sort of mundane things happen and then these completely ridiculous things are just thrown in and taken as obvious. And one author I kind of wanted to talk about related to that is Borges. And I think he does it a particularly brilliant way as far as trying to trick people. And the one I'll use for the best example, or one of the best examples in my opinion, is Chalon Ukbar and Orbis Tertius, which is one of my favorite short stories of his. And the way he kind of tricks the reader is because he includes himself being friends with Adolfo Bioy Casares, who is a real person, of course, a real author. So that means that Borges would have been at this guy's house at some point, and he probably thought of the short story then. Or maybe he was sitting home and thought about the last night when he had been there and thought of this. But it makes you think that, oh, okay, he's just recounting something that happened to him. And then the rest of the story can conceivably have happened in real life, until he starts talking about, oh, this really weird place. You're like, oh, okay, he's making this up now. But then by the end of the story, he makes you think, oh, well, this all really could have been, real. It could have all been an elaborate fake. And then the fake makes the story possibly real. But I think a lot of what he tried to do is he tried to write like non-fictional fiction. And that's really that I think that also gets to the heart of like the trick that people need. Because I think Coleridge was the one that first described the suspension of disbelief, which in some sense is like the person lying to themselves, because you can be reading a book and you can imagine that it's real, while of course if you actually leave the story for a second, you know that it's obviously fiction. Oh, okay, I'm just reading a story. But at some point the brain is able to like click itself into a certain state where it can lie to itself just continuously over and over, just all these things. It can somehow enter a dream state, because in a dream, everything is like a fake or a lie or a fabrication or a phantom or something, and your brain just allows itself to enter that every night. And one thing that got me thinking about this, especially recently, is I went to another one of those Finnegan's Wake meetings, and of course, Finnegan's Wake, well, maybe not of course, but a lot of people think it takes place at the night, because Joyce had said Ulysses, takes place during a day for the most part. And Finnegan's Wake is my book of the night. So that means that, that almost implies that it's dreamlike. And this past time we spent the 2 hours on page 14. And there are several like puns in page 14, words that can lead one in this direction. So he mentions a lot of words related to criminals. He says crook. He also mentions a worldwright, which, of course, relates to playwright. And then also write, the pun. He wrote the world. God, in this case, wrote the world. And also at the bottom here, he says sham. Mentioned just sham, which means like an invented copy, a fake, something fake, a trick. And I believe that's related to Shem, which is one of the characters in the book, who is a writer, a copyist, a scribbler. And if I remember correctly, if I remember my etymology correctly, Shem is related to James. And of course, James Joyce is the worldwright of Finnegan's Wake, which is, just a massive joke or a trick or a sham. But of course, people are willing to engage in it and take it for granted and do that sort of thing. So that's interesting in itself. And one of the first authors that really got me on this line of thinking was Herman Melville. Well, and William Faulkner, but mostly Melville in this like precise way that I'm speaking about this. Because his last novel is called The Confidence Man. And it's one of my favorite books I've ever read. And it's about a confidence man on April Fool's, April 1st, I think 1851 or in the 1850s at some point. and he's on a steamboat on the Mississippi. And one of the first scenes, there's a mysterious character entering the boat, and there's a wanted poster up, and everyone's like wondering, oh, what's this guy about? And oddly enough, I was just watching part of Eight and a Half by Federico Fellini, and the really interesting thing about that is the guy's having a dream in the beginning, and he's in a car, and everyone's staring at him, just like crazy, like staring. Everyone's staring at him, and then the end of the dream is he's way high up, and he's being yanked off a platform, and he's just falling and falling to the earth. Down, down, down. It's interesting. I didn't think about that before, the staring aspect. But so in the book, it's never obvious that so how it goes is it'll be some character, like let's say a cripple who's begging for money, and then there's like one guy who wants to give money and one guy who doesn't. Oh, he's just faking it. And then the other guy, oh no, have sympathy for him. Come on, dude. He's hurt. He can't make his own money. Give him some money. You have way too much anyway. Look at your suit. So it'll be back and forth, back and forth. But then there's always something that's kind of like unusual about the person at the centerpiece. So the cripple, you get the sensation that he's not actually a cripple, or he's like playing it up. And then continuously throughout the story, there's this like unusual sense that like, maybe this is like all a trick. Maybe this guy is every single one of these centerpiece characters, and he's just messing with them, trying to get them to do what he wants. Some points he'll try to trick them, make them do the wrong thing. Sometimes he'll try to trick them and make them do the right thing, like donating to charity or giving money to a crippled person. So on and so on. And it's never resolved, which is not a spoiler because why would you want it resolved? Just the way he ends it is very good. But, Melville, I think very clearly, with an eye for metaphor, was relating the confidence man to the writer. And, it's just perfect. It's really perfect. And even in the beginning of Moby Dick, you get that sensation, where he says, "Call me Ishmael," which is not his real name. So that means he's putting up something. He's putting up like something in front of him, like, call me this, even though it's not his real name. So you're already off to an obviously fictional start. And I think that's something Melville did very brilliantly, is like kind of tricking you in that way. Maybe in the opposite way of Borges, where Borges tried to make you believe that the story was real, Melville would remind you, it's not, And I mentioned earlier literary hoaxes. And while this is not necessarily a hoax, I think one of the most interesting examples of this is Fernando Pessoa and his different heteronyms. And the idea behind, making up personas. And there was also a point where he would write letters to people or write reviews for his other heteronyms. So, Alberto Cairo would be written about by Alvaro de Campos, and he would say how good of a poet he was, when of course all of it was Fernando Pessoa. Or he would write to people under the name Alvaro de Campos. So that's in some sense the lie is encountering real life, or the trick is encountering real life. And I was also thinking about this in connection to the creation of work. So since the goal, or part of the goal of the writer, is to trick the reader, or to lie to them, whether or not they're honest about it like Melville, or whether or not they are truly giving it as good of a go as they can like Borges, or in between. Um, at what point does the writer lie to themselves? Because one thing that struck me as far as like an anecdote was Faulkner was like kind of infamous for lying. He lied that he was in World War One when he was too short to be in World War One, and yet he always like made a good story out of it. And this must be a tendency for like writers or people with people very creative or with huge imaginations, because there comes a point where it's just so easy to lie, and it makes everything way more interesting that you just might as well. At least that's how I've seen it in my life. It's just it's not even out of malice, which is why lie is maybe not a good choice of words, but there's not really a good substitute for it, like, because it's just like a trickster. You're just doing it because you can. It's kind of like the idea behind that short story I mentioned by Guimarães Rosa. You know, she wants a frog and the frog comes. There's no motive behind it. There's no practical benefit or practical loss. You just do it because you can. And I think in some sense that is part of why lying is one of the genesis points of literature, or at least for people who write literature. They just, it's so easy to lie or to put on a mask or put on a show, make people believe it. And that's something that the recognitions goes on quite a lot, because a forged painting, it can become extremely ridiculous very quickly, because if you have two indistinguishable paintings, but the provenance or where it came from of one painting, and it happened to be by the Picasso or whatever, but the painting to the right of it looks exactly the same. And so you buy the one that Picasso owned for $10 million. But then you find out that the person selling it had switched them. And you bought the one by some random Dutch forger. And then you realize you paid $10 million for a forgery, but it looks exactly the same. The person would feel cheated, but why would they feel cheated? This is also the idea behind The Story of My Teeth by Valeria Luiselli, which I was reading at the same time as I was reading The Recognition, which was very good luck, actually, because this guy, he loses his teeth, or he pulls them out or something, and then he starts auctioning them off as famous people's teeth. And one of the ideas that comes out of that is, are people just paying for the story, like in a book? Because with a book, it's printed, signatures, first editions. Yeah, some people care about that, but most people just want the words. So it's really kind of removed from that. No one buys the manuscript. No one can buy the manuscript. They're usually in collections and so on. But with like painting, you can buy the first one. So it's that idea, are you buying the story when you buy an artwork? Is that why you pay $10 million? Because then, in some sense, like, you own the story. Are you buying the story? With books, are you buying the story? I don't know. That's interesting. But let's see, what else? Yeah, one other book I'll talk about that I've been really interested in recently is Take It or Leave It by Raymond Fetterman. And I've been like really interested in writers that are from around Gaddis's generation. Just because after I read Gaddis, I just got really interested in that time period. And um, one of the quotes that Fetterman uses here is by Flann O'Brien, who I just, he keeps coming up, so I'm going to have to read him soon enough. But I thought it was particularly good. He has one by Nietzsche, which is very good too, but it's not related to this video, so I'll save it for later. A satisfactory novel should be a self-evident sham to which the reader can regulate at will the degree of his credulity. So that's Flann O'Brien. And also for this book, he says, Raymond Fetterman says in the beginning here, all the characters and places in this book are real. They are made of words, therefore any resemblance with anything written, published or unpublished, is purely coincidental. And then he also says something like, all the characters in here are like inventions, even the singular or first person singular. Yeah, first person singular. So I think that's related to all this to some extent. And related to like lying to oneself. It seems to me that to create a great artwork, you need to believe that it's possible to do that. And that either requires like some like narcissism, like a narcissistic disorder, personality disorder, because really, what are the odds that any individual person can, write the 21st century Ulysses? If person is honest with themselves, it's exceedingly low probability, even if everything is going right. So, is that the point where the writer who can lie so easily lies to themselves and then therefore allows themselves to be capable of it? Or do you just maybe do what Beckett did and just realize the impossibility of it, or in some sense write a great work because he's not able to write a great work in the shadow of someone else? Because in some sense that's related to the anxiety of influence. Some of this stuff is related to me and Paperbird had lunch, and he was talking about David Foster Wallace a little bit. I don't want to go into it too much because he may have stuff to say about it, but I was thinking about to the extent to which a person lies to themselves about the work they're creating. Because I think a lot of people, for one reason or another, want to create a great work. And they either want to change the world, or they want to be immortal through their writing. And a lot of writers think that's possible. I'm thinking of William Gaddis. He wanted to write the last Christian novel. He wanted to change the world. He wanted everyone to realize all the mistakes they're making. When they read his book, everyone's like, oh, I can't believe I've been doing it this way this whole time. And Norman Mailer, he wanted to create, a shift in the consciousness of America. And, by the time they reach their 50s, 60s, they're like, oh, how foolish I was as a young man. But is it foolish, though? And I don't want to imply they're lying to themselves as some sort of intellectual dishonesty, but, were they, in some sense, was their youth tricking them? because I think there's a, I think McCarthy it was, Cormac McCarthy, who said, it's a good thing the youth don't know the hardships of this world because it wouldn't do them any good anyway. It wouldn't do these young writers any good to realize that they couldn't change anything. Because then there's a reasonable expectation that they wouldn't be able to write such a great work, and the world would be much worse for that. So you wonder, is that trick valuable? Like, is the trick the highest form? Like, secrets and lies. Are secrets and lies the two most valuable things, the two most valuable ways of communication? Secrets and lies, or tricks you could put in there, because lies has a overly negative connotation, I think, in most cases. And that kind of reminds me of this quote I recently found by Thomas Bernhard. He's talking about a pianist. He said, you could clear the room, clear the concert hall, fill it with dust, and start throwing buckets of water on the pianist, and they'll still continue playing the piano. And he said the same goes for writing. And I think that also is one of the ways behind, like, genius, or creating a huge work, a massive work, like the recognitions, or like some stuff Bernhard wrote, or Moby Dick. In some sense, it's not a choice, but I think Fernando Pessoa, who I talked about earlier, has this line where, how many other people are sitting in their room thinking they're geniuses just like I am? Of course it's ridiculous, but if no one thought they were a genius, then no one would be. And Pessoa said it much better. So if you want to find that, just read all of his stuff, because it's worth reading anyway. But so I've been thinking about that too, like what creates a great artwork. And I think there's this one guy, some Hungarian guy, who said about genius, a way you can find a genius is they will take infinite pains in the focus of their study, or whatever their focus is. They will just do it forever, and that's it. And I suppose, in honor of Cesare Pavese and his diaries, This Business of Living, I was turning through it today, and I found that on the 2nd of December in 1937, he wrote in his diary, "Today you have talked too much." And I definitely feel like that's the case for me in the last few days. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment. Let me know what you liked about it or what you disagreed with. I'm going to post a link to the Discord that I have here. We've been doing short story readings. We did Borges, Kafka. Now we're doing the first short story in The Dead, or in Dubliners by James Joyce. It's not The Dead, misspoke. And we've also been watching movies. We watched Birdman, some Godard, Tarkovsky. Right now we're on 8.5 by Fellini. So feel free to join us with those. It's also really cool people in there. Yeah, and finally, death is a gang boss.